The Vethara showed up at 0340 station time, which meant I was already at my console, halfway through a cold cup of reclaimed coffee, when their transit signature lit the board. I'd been the comms and sensor lead on ISV Cauldron for 3 years. Before that, 2 years on a relay barge in the Auroch Belt. Before that, the Academy, where they spend 8 weeks teaching you how to handle a first contact, and 4 years teaching you everything else. By the time the Vethara fleet resolved into 5 discrete hulls, a broad command chevron and 4 flanking pursuit class attendants, each twice our displacement, I was already keying the standard hailing band. Not because I wasn't paying attention, because I was. The board told me exactly what they were. Vethara Dominion survey formation, claim-and-catalogue configuration, sublight speed deceleration burn, weapons cold, textbook. I'd been trained for this. What nobody trains you for is the part that came after. The Vethara flag commander's name, translated loosely as something between an honorific and a title, the closest the diplomatic lexicon could manage, was High Surveyor Varath Koss, third cast of the expansionary reach. He appeared on my secondary screen about 40 seconds after I hailed, seated in what looked like a high-backed throne of banded resin, his lower pair of hands folded and his upper pair behind him in what their cast, custom read as relaxed authority. His head was narrow and long, the eyes positioned high, the jaw articulation nearly horizontal. When he spoke, the translation lag was 7 seconds. Long enough to make every exchange feel like a negotiation in itself. Station designation Cauldron, the translation rendered, flattening his tone into something almost bored. This sector falls within the Dominion's unclaimed survey catalog, reference grid 904. You are operating in advance of any registered human territorial filing. State your installation purpose and expected duration. I glanced at Commander Oakes, who stood at the back of the deck with his arms crossed, watching my board over my shoulder. He nodded once. Standard response. High Surveyor, I said. Cauldron is a permanent installation. With the Terran Waystation Authority. Under charter date, 81 years prior to this transmission. We're happy to transmit the full registration packet. Our installation purpose is facility maintenance, deep space monitoring, and anchorage operations for this region. 7 seconds. His expression didn't change. Anchorage operations, he repeated. For what? I kept my voice level. I'll let the registration packet speak to that. Transmitting now. While the packet burned across the channel, his sensor operator, a smaller figure at a lower console and frame, would have been running their standard sweep. That was procedure. We knew they'd sweep. The whole station knew they'd sweep. We'd been doing this long enough that when a new ship arrived, crew had a word for the moment. They called it the pause. I watched the sweep return populate my board in real time, mirrored from our own passive sensors. The Vethara were good. Their equipment was current generation, tight beam, high resolution. They'd get the station's hull, the docking arms, the communication array, the reactor signature. All of it logged and unremarkable. A human way station of modest displacement, anchored to a dark body on the galactic rim. A survey team would note it, flag it, file a competing territorial claim, and the lawyers on both sides would argue about it for a decade. That was the expected sequence. Their sweep didn't stop at the station hull. That was the part that always happened, and the part that never got easier to watch. I could see from the return data that their sensor operator had widened the aperture, pulling back, trying to make sense of the mass distribution. Planetoid, our station, was anchored to read wrong on standard sweep. It always did. The density gradients were asymmetric. There were hollow spaces that shouldn't be hollow, and dense formations that corresponded to no mineral survey profile on record. Then, if you were running a good enough thermal pass, you found the heat. Not much heat, not at the surface, but rhythmic. Faint, deep, rhythmic. Like breathing. I watched the pause stretch out on the secondary screen. The High Surveyor had gone very still. His lower hands had unfolded, and were now braced on the console in front of him. His upper hands had come down from behind him. His sensor operator said something to him that my board didn't pick up, a private channel, and I saw Varath Koss look at his own screen for a long moment before he looked back at me. The silence on the channel ran to 11 seconds before he spoke. When he did, some of the boredom had left his voice. What is the mass of the body your station is anchored to? It's in the registration packet, I said. But the short answer is that we don't have a complete figure. The measurement problem is ongoing. The body is not geological. No. Another pause. On my board, I could see his fleet had reduced thrust to station keeping. They weren't advancing. They weren't retreating. They were holding, the way you hold when you can't decide which direction is safer. How long, he said. And his translator didn't append a subject or an object, which meant the question was exactly as raw as it sounded. How long has Cauldron been here? I asked. Or, how long has the body been here? He didn't answer immediately. On the flanking hulls, I was reading a spike in their sensor activity. All 4 attendants now running independent sweeps, as if they expected their flag's readings to be wrong. They weren't wrong. Every pass came back the same. Asymmetric mass. Hollow chambers the size of mid-sized moons. And the heat, cycling at irregular but unmistakable intervals. 81 seconds between the deepest pulses. We'd timed it. We'd been timing it for 8 decades. Both, the High Surveyor said finally. Station, 81 years. I let that land for a moment. The body predates any survey record we have access to. It was here when our first probe passed through this region. It was here before that. The secondary screen showed Vethara turn and speak at length to someone off frame. I didn't need the translation. Seen that conversation before. Not always in that configuration. Not always from that species, but I'd seen it. The rapid exchange. The gestures that read as disbelief regardless of biology. The moment when whoever was being consulted checked their own board and came back with the same face. The numbers don't change. They never change. When he turned back to me, something had shifted in his bearing. Not fear, exactly. The Vethara didn't carry themselves that way. Their caste structure didn't allow for fear in a flag posture. But the boredom was entirely gone. Nation, he said carefully. Its function. You said anchorage operations. That's correct. You are anchored to it. We are anchored to it, I agreed. And the anchor holds. I looked at my board. Below my feet, 4 meters of hull plating and another 40 of reinforced tether assembly. Something older than any civilization or either of us represented was doing what it had been doing before our sun had finished forming. Breathing, in its own time, in its own way, in a sleep deep so that 8 decades of human activity on its outer skin had registered as nothing more than the faintest vibration. We hadn't woken it. We'd built a station to watch it, to measure it, to be ready on the day that the intervals changed. So far, they hadn't changed. The anchor holds, I said. Vethara looked at you for a long moment across 7 light seconds of distance. I held his gaze, because that was what you did. You didn't look away. You let them see that you'd had 81 years to sit with this, that you'd grown up with the hum in the deck plates, that the people who came before you had looked at the same readings and poured the first bolt, and said, "Twee will hold the watch." His fleet didn't move for another 4 hours. I stayed at my console and drank another cold cup of coffee, and filed my contact report and listened to the station settle around me. The deep pulse came up through the chair every 81 seconds, the way it always had. At some point, Oakes brought me a ration bar and didn't say anything, which was the right call. When the Vethara finally broke station keeping, they did not file a competing territorial claim. They burned for the transit point at roughly double the deceleration rate they'd arrived at. They did not hail us again. I logged their departure and leaned back in my seat and put my hand flat on the console, the way my predecessor had shown me when I first took the post. You could feel it if you were very still. That slow, enormous rhythm, moving through the hull, through the tethers, through 81 years of poured concrete and welded steel and human stubbornness. 81 seconds. Then again, I thought about the people who had poured the first anchor bolt. What they must have seen on their sensors. The same thing Vethara had seen today. What they decided instead of leaving. We stayed, I thought. We've always stayed. That's the thing none of the surveys ever figure out how to catalog. The station hummed, and I went back to work.